Then we have in the 19th century the rise of totalitarianisms, such as Marxism. Eventually, in the beginning of the 20th century, fascism. You had the socialism, you had atheism, all attempts to, once and for all, give an explanation to reality, to get rid of this untidiness that plagues human existence, and to replace it with something that would give the black and white answer that would once for all define all reality. And we looked last time at the terrible effects that this kind of totalitarianism has produced. In Stalinism, the number of people starved in Ukraine in pursuit of the industrialization of the Soviet Union, and then the labor camps as a system of internal colonialism that Stalin practiced on the basis of what Rosa Luxemburg had told him, that the Western countries are rich because they had colonies, they took the resources from there, which of course we did in one way or another. We purchased them, but not quite fairly at all times, etc. Nevertheless, the explanation was that we became wealthy because we took it from colonies. Mind you, in parentheses, that Switzerland and Sweden never had colonies, and they became wealthy in other ways. Colonialism wasn't the only way to become wealthy. But nevertheless, there's some truth to that, and because there was no more land to colonize for Stalin, he turned his own people into colonial people and incarcerated millions of people, made them work for pittance until they died, and provided for the rest of the population in this way both cheap housing, free medicine, and cheap university training, and fooled them into believing that the government provided. Well, the government provided because it stole from over 30 million people that died in Stalinist labor camps. That kind of totalitarianism is widespread through the 19th and 20th century. It was an attempt to indeed shorten history, bring about perfection as seen in the blueprint of an ideology right now. And then you have other forms of totalitarianism. The 20th century is one of the most brutal centuries where in the name of humanism we have killed masses of human beings. Think of Pol Pot. Think of the effects of China's Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. Think of Gandhi's withholding from India stages of development by insisting on primitive village economics, etc. All in the name of an idea, a blueprint that seemed so appealing that in the name of advance of the people or the purity of the race or producing a new human race that would no longer have envy and competition, as in Marxism, by abolishing the middle class, the bourgeois, the self-thinking person. Or in Pol Pot's regime, as I think I told you last time, a friend of mine who was married to a Kampuchean widow, the only reason she survived is because when they gave her a piece of paper to read, she turned it upside down, pretending that she could not read. For anyone who could read in Kampuchea was suspect and likely to be killed, because anybody who reads can think for himself, and that's a dangerous person in Pol Pot's totalitarianism. And then you had, as the background for much of it, dare I say, a certain kind of romanticism, a view of life as I wish it to be rather than as it is. An idea of life that is fueled by fantasy. Think of Mary Shelley and Lord Byron and others in the 19th century. A view of life unencumbered by verisimilitude, that is, by being true to veracity, being or like truth. Had nothing to do, it's a pretty image, a lovely idea of intense love without responsibility, of going from place to place without continuity, just yourself, expressing just yourself. A romanticism that precisely is based on an idea, not on improving life of the individual or the individual situation or the nation or mankind as a whole. I think, dare I say, that American belief in its own exceptionalism is another kind of ism that can be very, very dangerous when it's a belief in the source of a new kind of human being after he's crossed the Red Sea and come into the Promised Land, that is, crossed the Atlantic and come to these shores, that somehow out of this would arise a different kind of a person. As I said last time, you know, we easily forget that many of the early immigrants were Europeans who brought themselves with it and couldn't run away from themselves. They brought their guns and their attitude towards difficult neighbors. And they were the ones who easily, under Jacksonian democracy, went out and broke treaties made with Indians and killed them by the hundreds of thousands, etc. There was no new kind of a person born on these shores. There was an exceptional situation of creating a country, of a government, and an attitude towards life which was freed from past bondages, but not from the bondage of having to live in a reality that God had already made, and with themselves as broken human beings that needed law to bind, to close down, as it were, the all too fanciful imagination of inventing a blueprint for a better life situation. Karl Popper, a famous philosopher, says utopianism is an attachment to a blueprint for which countless sacrifices must be made. And that was always the justification in these various totalitarianisms which I just mentioned and dealt with a little longer last time. For ideology is a fixed blueprint. I know exactly where you belong. I know exactly what kind of a person you need. Versus the political